and Wednesday, February 11 at 3:30 a.m. with delayed broadcast at 8 p.m. Every pass, every goal, every moment, live and exclusive on CVM.
Brought to you by Water and Best Dressed Chicken.
The internationally acclaimed On Stage with Winford Williams.
At a new time, Saturdays at 8 p.m. on CVM TV.
So much more than entertainment.
Every dream conquered is another dream.
This is the Small Axe Jesse Rall representing for CVM. See it happen. We and the lion them go, whoa, whoa, whoa. We and the lion them good.
Examining a clash between law and power, between what the rules require and what the leaders say a crisis demands. Following Hurricane Melissa, the Auditor General found that emergency procurement procedures were breached. The Prime Minister has not condemned those breaches. Instead, he says Jamaicans' problem is a bureaucracy that is too slow, too rigid, and unable to respond to crisis. The minister at the center of the controversy says he did nothing wrong. He saved lives and that he would do it again. And the agency responsible for the disaster response is now racing to fix inventory, deploy unused equipment, and move on. So tonight we ask a very precise question. When the rules bend in an emergency, who decides how far they go? And what does the country lose when they break? This is Lead Story Prime. Thanks so much for staying with us inside Lead Story Prime. Now, to help us understand the rules, we are joined by Andre Bennett, an attorney at law and leading voice on public procurement law and policy. Mr. Bennett, thanks so much for joining us inside Lead Story Prime.
Thanks for having me, Jamie.
All right, well, let's separate speed from legality here. You're the man to help us understand legality. Help us then understand the legal flexibility that exists in an emergency, because we are trying to separate now speed from illegality. When you need flexibility in an emergency, what does the law provide and what does it not permit, no matter the circumstances?
All right, so I'll answer that question directly as you've asked it, and then hopefully I'll get a chance to also explain generally about what the procurement rules
Absolutely,
are.
because that's going to be super important. This is what guides the process, and then the emergency procurement procedures are the special part of this larger process. But it's helpful, as we have seen the Auditor General's report on procurement issues at the University Hospital of the West Indies, now hearing about these issues that have been raised post-Hurricane Melissa, and constantly seeing this be in the news with pushback from those who say the process is too slow. We have to understand that. But first, in an emergency, as we had after Hurricane Melissa, as we would have had after Hurricane Beryl, where are we now? What does the law allow and what does the law say? No matter what, you can't do that.
Great. So emergency procurement, or procurement in emergency circumstances or in circumstances of emergency or urgency, is a specific derogation in the Public Procurement Act. And what I mean is it's amongst the class of non-covered procurement. So the public procurement system in Jamaica is governed by the Public Procurement Act 2015, which was amended in 2018 and again in 2025. In that act, the first schedule to the act sets out a number of different kinds of contracts that are not subject to the general procedures in the act. All right? And what the emergency rules now require is that there's a threshold test. So it says where something unforeseen has arisen.
Specifically talking about it not being planned for,
Absolutely.
not something that you could anticipate, good.
Right. Or where there's a disaster, or where there's a period of public emergency as declared under any statute. So once that threshold is met, a head of procuring entity is empowered to award a procurement contract for the reason of preserving life, property, money, etc.
And that's because we're all trying to follow along here is Section 20 of the legislation.
Well, Section 20
yes.
establishes the role of the head of entity, identifies the head of entity as the authority.
Great. So you're saying the rules say the head of entity, the person, and this would be entity responsible for the disaster?
The one that would be making the disaster response.
Making the disaster response here in Jamaica, that would be the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management in the particular case here of a hurricane like Hurricane Melissa. They would be the ones that said to save lives, to
preserve public property,
yes,
to preserve money.
They would be the ones that would be making a request, all right? If
they would be making a contract award without any fanfare or fantasy. There's an emergency.
Something is going on. Quick.
Go clear the road. Go build the fence. Rescue the people. Get some helicopters to do evacuations. Okay? And then the rule says, within 30 days of that award of contract, report the award of contract in the prescribed format. Currently, the prescribed format is the Government of Jamaica's electronic procurement system.
GOJEP.
That's right.
There you go.
And what are you to report? The contract, who we award the contract to,
yes,
the contract price, and a statement of what emergency has justified the contract.
All right, we're having this big conversation then because Section 20 that indicates this authority. The head of the procuring entity is the authority that makes this sort of request. Why is that structure essential when billions move quickly? And we have to have this context in place because as we're having conversations now about the Auditor General's reports that had been tabled talking about post-Hurricane Melissa procurement, it is going to be so important for us to have background, the kind of legal background that you can provide so everybody's on the same page when we start hearing responses now from individuals, both in government and from civil society organizations, who say what took place should not have taken place. So why is the head of the procuring entity, for this purpose we'll say ODPE, why were they the ones that had the permission now to make this move?
Right, so Jamaica's arrangements in relation to public financial management recognizes that there has to be someone that is given authority under law to bind the government in contracts. And so the provision in the Public Procurement Act merely recites those long-established positions that there's an accounting officer who is recognized as the person who must account, as it suggests, for all the money that's spent. And that person must account for the procedures that were employed and must account for the outcomes as well.
We need to hold somebody then, the feet to the fire after
That's
all
right.
this takes place to see did you spend the money in ways that were wise and in ways that made sense. Well, let's first hear why we're having this conversation. Because if you need to hold somebody's feet to the fire, well, feet are being held to the fire and there are questions now being asked about the procurement process that took place after Hurricane Melissa. Let's hear from Amoy.
If it is that my timely, effective action as Minister of Telecommunications and co-chair of the Cabinet Subcommittee for the Melissa recovery was beneficial by getting help to those affected persons, whether saving a life, getting food to them, whatever it is. I make no apology whatsoever. As a matter of fact, I go further. In circumstances such as these, if I had to do it again, I would do it again.
That remark from Minister of Energy, Telecommunications and Transport and co-chair of the Relief and Recovery Oversight Committee, Dara Vaz, last week, in the context of a recent Auditor General's report finding breaches in the emergency procurement procedures after Hurricane Melissa, has started a firestorm of discussion around procurement processes in Jamaica. The report uncovered, among other things, breaches of procurement law, inadequate documentation, and contracts awarded outside allowable emergency thresholds. Coming out of Hurricane Melissa, this has been the largest single-event emergency procurement exercises in recent Jamaican history. More than 11 billion Jamaican dollars has now been spent through emergency procurement processes across multiple entities. Of that, over 5 billion was spent immediately following the hurricane. Now, the Auditor General wasn't suggesting that the government do nothing in an emergency. Neither does it argue against urgency. It argues that the law was not followed. One of the central contradictions flagged by the audit was that the state justified certain purchases as urgent, but auditors later found that some of the equipment procured was not in use. Public procurement is not about paperwork. It's about how the state spends public money and who benefits when it does. The Public Procurement Act of 2015, supported by the Public Procurement Regulations of 2018, sets out how public funds must be spent in normal times and in emergencies. Emergency procurement is allowed under Jamaican law, but rules still apply. Even in emergencies, the law still requires record keeping, value for money assessments, and post-award transparency. Speed is permitted, lack of transparency is not. Importantly, under Jamaican law, procurement authorities doesn't rest with political instruction. It rests with the head of the procuring entity. For Melissa-related emergencies, that would be the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, ODPEM. When that line is crossed, it's not a policy disagreement, but a governance breach. It's why the response from Minister Vaz has come under intense scrutiny, raising even deeper questions. Does executive necessity override statutory compliance? And if it does once, does it do so every time billions are on the line? Because when procurement rules fail, the consequences are not abstract, and the cost is paid elsewhere. Fewer projects completed, prices inflate, competition collapses, and public confidence erodes. This is why procurement laws exist, not to slow government down, but to protect public value when pressure is highest. This is not a story about a storm. It's a story about what happens to the rule of law when speed meets billions. It's back to you, Jody.
Thanks so much, Amoy Harriet, taking us through the contours of the discussion that have, as she's highlighted, started national conversation around procurement once again. Andre Bennett, as we look at this now, there's been a discussion that says the minister can act, must act. We'll talk about that along with our other two guests here inside Lead Story as we take a break, continuing a look at when the rules bend.
Listen to this?
Daddy, don't believe everything you see on the internet. Mommy, no, don't ever allow the internet to distort your sense of self. I'm rich! Grandma, it's a scam. Internet can be a very dangerous place now. Let's focus on using it safer. But I'm serious, Daddy! This is horrible.
But that no good.
They were all so mean.
It's alright. Come in. Chill. Never mind, hon.
Thanks, guys.
It's the energy of food people, yet something pulsing inside. It's the beat in every soul, a sweet feeling that we cannot hide.
Flow and the Flow Foundation remind you to use the internet safely and responsibly. Together for a better internet.
The internationally acclaimed On Stage with Winfred Williams.
At a new time, Saturdays at 8 p.m. on CVM TV.
So much more than entertainment.
Thanks so much for staying with us inside Lead Story Prime. We now turn to the consequences. What happens to a country when procurement rules do not hold? We have two more guests joining us inside this discussion. We have President of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, Emil Laiba. He's also an attorney at law with more than 2 decades of experience in corporate and commercial law. That's going to be important as we talk about everybody following the rules. And Jeanette Calder, Executive Director of the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal. Now, before we pull them into this discussion to talk to us about the drama of all that has gone on, we also have on set with me today Andre Bennett, an attorney at law and a leading voice on public procurement law and policy. Having heard before the break, Andre, Amoy, give us the outline of the law that we have here in Jamaica and the drama that has led us to having more of these conversations. What's the principle behind procurement that needs to ground every conversation we have around this?
So I think there are two sort of main streams of thinking that may admit of a number of principles. On the one hand, public procurement is absolutely interested in acquiring the right things at the right time, at the right price. And on the other hand, it must do it in the right way. And so if you collect all the objectives in the Public Procurement Act, for example, you will see that you have some that deal a lot with process and some that deal a lot with outcomes.
Okay.
What the process ones do, it really is a means of establishing trust in government and its institutions. The whole public gets to understand what government intends to do, that it shows that it's done it. It gets to hold them to account when they don't do it. And so that develops, as I said before, trust. And trust is an important component of this project of democracy and the running of a nation. You need to be able to trust the people that are in charge. So when those principles are undermined or breached, there is a breach of trust.
Ooh, Emil Laiba, I come to you on this one then, because you are representing the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, and legal certainty for businesses is an important thing that they're looking for, that trust as well. How important is predictability in government procurement, even during emergencies? Emil Laiba, yes, we're hearing you now.
Yes, sorry. It is essential to have certainty and rule of law, but there is also the aspect that I was part of the Private Sector Emergency Operations Committee, sat in the meeting with Minister Vaz, with representatives from Starlink, and the concerns were raised about connectivity, and a lot was happening on the ground at that time. Now, this is not an excuse for breach, but when it is that you had a humanitarian crisis, they really, I would say, two things. The Auditor General did her job as she was by law required to do, so it's no critique of her at all. But there are circumstances where perhaps our former Prime Minister said it best, where the law might not be a shackle, in the sense that you do need to save lives, and if it is that in saving lives you see that you have breached the law or process or procedure, then you need to look at that as a gap and recognize that as perhaps something that and that may need to be corrected legislatively or procedurally, so that when you next have a disaster, you are not placed in a position where you're breaching the law or the policy in order to effect humanitarian aid.
All right, Jeanette Calder, let me pull you in here because we're watching a situation where the government had to respond to Hurricane Melissa following the devastation of Hurricane Melissa in October of 2025. Minister Darrell Vaz authorized the purchase of 200 Starlink satellite units, totaling approximately 12 million Jamaican dollars to restore connectivity. The Auditor General, in one of the reports coming out of that assessment, said 3 big things. 1, there's a procedural breach. That under Section 20, it's not the minister who should be doing it, only the head of entity should be doing that. That's the head of ODPEM. ODPEM, though, was in a bit of a bind at the time. All sorts of excitement going on there, but it did not say the minister could do that. 2, retroactive paperwork, with the Auditor General saying that the devices were delivered on November 14, but the official request, the emergency requisition, was only created on November 19, effectively backfilling the work. And despite the emergency justification, that's number 3, an audit of 8 entities showed that 41 devices remained in storage and unused months later. What was your response to that audit report from the Auditor General, Jeanette?
Yes, well, I'm a little taken aback by Emil's comment in light of what was said before by the former head, the former chief of the Office of Procurement Policy at the Ministry of Finance. I think Mr. Bennett did an actual good job of really explaining to the people of Jamaica that the government of Jamaica and the Parliament of Jamaica has actually done very good legislative work, which is something I say time and time again. Not just in general, but specifically as it relates to emergency procurement. The documentation, or rather, sorry, the policy and the legislation that the Auditor General is referencing, just the name of it I find to be very telling. So notwithstanding, I understand what Emil is saying, the conditions on the ground, the emergency, a lot that is happening. The government has thought this through and says when we have an emergency, there's a particular way in which we're going to fly the gate so nobody has to worry about red tape, nobody has to worry about bureaucracy. The note that the minister himself rightly referred to and the Auditor General, and I'm going to share with the public what it's called the guidance note, yeah? On what?
Emergency procurement.
Of goods? No.
Oh.
It's the guidance note on the acquisition of goods, services, and works in the situation of emergency or extreme urgency. Now that tells me everything that the government has thought through or has tried to think through. How are we going to move fast and quick when it's extreme urgency? And then how are we going to guide heads of agencies such as ODPEM as to how they can ensure that the people get a response like this. Now, when was this guidance note approved? Not 10 years ago, but as recently as November. It's a fresh act on the part of the government. It came right on time. It didn't come because of Hurricane Melissa. This is a government that was already working on this. I believe Dr. Nigel Clark already began to ask for these thresholds to allow heads of entity to move much quicker. For things like $12 million, I think we moved from 30 million. Heads of entities can now do what? They 60. Can actually approve up to 60 million. They've doubled it just to get the grease, the WD-40 going. So the claim that this was done, coming out of the minister's statement, on the basis of a need to respond to people who needed food and needed lives to be saved, the government of Jamaica had already put in the kinds of rules we need to make the head of entity move as fast as possible. So that would have really been my first comment. But the second comment, Jody, would be to say this. Did anybody, as a result of the breach of laws for good purpose, were any lives saved? And, What impact did it have? Because that's how we begin to measure value for money. Was there a real basis for this? Now, you mentioned 80 devices that remained in storage, but that is not really all the report has said. And what the report has told us is that the 200 devices bought by ODPEM were not sent to ODPEM on the direction of the minister, was sent to the Office of the Police Commissioner. But what the Auditor General has told us, in addition to 80 that remained in storage and never left, is that 41 were sent out to other entities that also remained in storage wherever those entities are, and there's a list of the names of those entities. But we go further. Another 13 came back to the Office of the Police Commissioner. The report says because they were over allocated. What I understand is that perhaps those entities had already received Starlinks. I'm not sure, but they came back. When they came back, they were not deployed to schools or wherever there were people without communication. They remained in storage. And the balance of the 200, which is 66 devices, the Auditor General has not been able to verify, and there's a list in that report, one unit that has yet been put into use as of the date of that report. So what the people of Jamaica need to understand is, notwithstanding the concern for emergency, government has taken care of that. And notwithstanding the explanation that I needed to save lives, not one unit has the Auditor General been able to find that has been activated. So where is the value for money? And where is the argument? Where's the footing for the argument that says, I did this to help the people of Jamaica?
All right, let me pull in Emil Liva here in that conversation. Given then that you're hearing Jeanette Cald, Executive Director of the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, disagree with what has been put on the table by you as you're explaining the need to save lives, echoing what had been said by Minister Darrell Vaz. Do you believe that if we accept that, saving lives, if that's to be the reason, is the one that is used, we're essentially saying the Public Procurement Act is optional during a storm?
No, and I thank you for that opportunity to clarify what in fact I'm saying. I'm not saying that one should always breach the law or that these things are not important and should not be followed. I started by saying that the Auditor General was correct in her findings and how she structured her report. What I'm saying, so when you look at the Auditor General's report, what she was saying is that the committees that should have been in place and that it should have been routed through the head of the procurement procuring entity. Now, it is a fact that when the private was called into this crisis situation, there were concerns about who are we supposed to talk to.
Good, and that is certainly something that after the break we're going to talk about, Emil Liba, because the concerns about who was heading ODPEM at the time are central to some of the findings of the Auditor General, especially in a climate vulnerable state. Emergencies are no longer rare, so we're going to see what precedent we're setting. Stay with us inside Lead Story Prime.
Delve deep into the issues. We'll take you beneath the surface.
Greetings and salutations. My name is Orville Higgins, and it's another edition of Fan Central.
Talking to the people at the heart of the top sporting stories. Hear from your favorite sportsmen and women and the administrators who work tirelessly to make it all happen. It's a live sports talk.
I've written an entire article.
Yes.
Looking at all the major issues every Tuesday at 9 p.m. It's Fan Central. When the Sunshine Girls play, the world watches. 3 tests, 1 mission. Take on world number 1, Australia. This is more than a game. It's Jamaica on the world stage. Thursday, February 5, live at 3 a.m. Sunday, February 8 at 12:30 p.m. And Wednesday, February 11 at 3:30 a.m. with delayed broadcast at 8 p.m. Every pass, every goal, every moment. Live and exclusive on CVM.
Brought to you by Water and Best Dressed Chicken.
Start your journey with a Jane Bank Small Business Loan with small business loans with as little as $10,000 and up to $4 million.
The time is 8:30.
We've been talking to President of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, Emil Laiba, and Jeanette Calder, Executive Director of the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal Online. And in studio, we have with us Andre Bennett, attorney at law and a leading voice on public procurement policy. Emil Laiba, before the break, you were talking to us about the situation on the ground during Hurricane Melissa. Let me just pull in the viewers here for a moment and take them back to that time in October and November of 2025, because right at the heart of Hurricane Melissa recovery, ODPEM underwent a dramatic change in leadership and reporting structure. On November 4, Prime Minister Holness announced that ODPEM was being moved from the Ministry of Local Government directly under the Office of the Prime Minister, OPM. The new head was put in place. Richard Thompson, the long-standing acting Director General at ODPEM, was reassigned to a strategic role within the OPM. He was replaced by Commander Alvin Gale, a senior military officer seconded from the Jamaica Defence Force. And the reason, the Prime Minister stated, was to tighten coordination and use a JDF's horsepower to manage the Category 5 disaster response. Now, given that context then and the moves that were taking place at that time, Emil Laiba, help us understand then why you are saying we needed to make sure that we could do what was necessary in the crisis that Jamaica experienced after Hurricane Melissa.
Yes, thanks for that. So, again, let me be very clear. IPM should have been properly structured to comply with emergency procurement regulations, and it should have been done in the way prescribed in the guidance notes, etc., and so on. But the question that then arises is this: if it was not structured in the best way to allow the relief efforts to move as quickly as they needed to move, do you then do nothing until there is a proper appointment?
What is the problem? Because after Hurricane Melissa took place in October up to November 4, there was a Director General at ODPEM. Right after, a new Director General had been appointed in Commander Gale. What is it that we're seeing as a gap that would not have allowed these heads of agency, in Acting Director Thompson and Director Commander Gale, to have made the request as the law requires, and not the Minister with responsibility for telecommunications and energy, even as he sat as co-chair of our Risk and Resilience subcommittee?
So I can't speak to the internal mechanisms of government and what was happening within government and government entities. What I can say is that from the private sector, we were not in seeking to join with the government to assist and facilitate relief efforts. We were at first very unclear as to where to turn and how to go about best effecting that relief. And we were we did have some concerns about that for a while. I can't speak to why that specific procurement was not done through the acting head at that point or not. But I can say from the private sector perspective, we did have some questions that we were unclear on. So at the end of the day, what we wanted to see was action taken to protect the people of Jamaica, action taken to ensure that things are operated as they should. Now, just to address Jeanette, and again, it's not a question of challenging the findings of the Auditor General. It's a question of what was the state of affairs at the time the decision was made. Because the concerns that Jeanette raised would have applied whether or not it was done. The decision was taken by the head of procuring entity or another individual. Now, at the time that things were happening, there was that concern with all the networks being down, and so the persons who were engaging in relief efforts couldn't, once they entered into these so-called dead zones, they couldn't communicate, and that also, you know, the shelters, the various emergency areas. Now, I can't speak to how things were applied once they were procured and why they were not deployed in the way that they were supposed to. There was a lot of things that were in movement at the time. I'm not seeking to justify government wastage, right? So I hope they sell these things, make back the money and put it back in the coffers, right? So it's not a question of saying justify the ex post facto wastage. I'm simply giving the context, as I said, as somebody who was directly involved at the time, where what information was spotty and, you know, you were just getting things in bits and pieces. And this is the feedback you're receiving on the ground as to what the needs were. You're trying to secure information from different sources that where places were blocked off and things like that. So again, that was one of the things that was communicated as a need.
I think that's so important that you've highlighted, Emil Leiber, the reality on the ground after Hurricane Melissa, the urgency for people to be able to contact their family and friends, knowing that areas across Jamaica had been without power, knowing as well that there had been a real need to see the government actively involved in taking care of its people. Andre Bennett, though, you started us off by saying procurement is concerned about getting the thing and the process you use to get the thing. Hearing now these conversations, is there a way that we could say, you know what, perhaps sometimes the process has to bend to the urgency, the emergency, the situation on the ground?
Well, I think that's exactly what the emergency rules admit of. So what do you do in an emergency? Award the contract and then you publish the notification of award. I mean, contrast that with the ordinary procedure that would involve a number of different committees, a number of different institutions giving oversight, sort of prescribed documents and paperwork that must be complied with. All of those are suspended in emergency circumstances. And it is exactly for that reason. It's so that lives can be saved and property can be saved. So I think that the government did recognize that, as Jeanette said, and we did extensive work. I say we because I was at the time the head of government policy and procurement. And so, you know, putting together a set of rules that suspended all of the ordinary controls was really meant to ensure that people would be saved.
So we had rules, but much more flexible rules, but just not a situation where there were no rules.
Yeah, in fact, what emergency procurement rules were before the recent amendments were problematic. So you had a possibility of using Section 25 of the Act, and that is a single source procurement. And what that would require is, if the contract award at the time was over 30 million, it's an emergency, you know, you would still have to go to the Public Procurement Commission. If it was over 60 million, you'd have to go to Cabinet before you could get a contract awarded. And that's just nuts, because people are likely to lose their lives and property. There was a collateral policy that said, well, you could award a contract up to $100 million. And once it went over 100 million, then you'd now need PPC and Cabinet. Again, who knows what a response is going to be valued? So the new flexible rules actually say, well, you can award a contract. Be careful of the fiscal responsibility issues.
And the value for money that is always going to be the base of everything that we do.
Not a free-for-all.
Yes, the public's money.
That's right. So ensure that you're buying good things, things that you won't need to buy again. But you now have a lot more flexibility to award and then report.
All right. Jeanette Calder, given then that we have this situation, we've heard Emil Leiber indicating the situation on the ground and how it appears the business community felt at the time, wanting to be able to jump in and assist, but being unclear as to what was going on, and hearing now Andre Bennett clarify for us the rules that existed. How do you assess the response? Because we've seen a couple of responses to the Auditor General's report. The Prime Minister hasn't directly condemned the breach, but he's used the controversy, some would argue, to launch a critique of the administrative system, saying that it's too bureaucratic, it's too rigid and unresponsive. Commander Alvin Gale, the new Director General of ADPEM, he's jumped in and said, well, there's a logistics gap, admitting that one of his first tasks was to establish a huge logistics software capability, that the audit compliance following the ADPEM report was something he had to work on and to shift to resilience. But starting off Amoy's report and starting off the firestorm of conversation around this was the response by Minister Darrell Vaz. He's been the most defiant, directly challenging the Auditor General's expertise, calling the report uninformed and inaccurate. His finding that he breached Section 20, he argued that his actions were justified and necessary because of the communications void. And he said, the opposition, I don't want to hear from you, indicating that members of the opposition, including leader of the opposition, actually received and used Starlink devices during the storm. His message to them, the accountability they demand should begin with the devices they received. Jeanette Calder, how do you assess those responses now to the Auditor General's work?
Well, I want to say to the people of Jamaica that we have an Auditor General's department that has been serving this country long before independence. When I was in government, Adrian Strawn was there as the Auditor General, and I believe Mrs. Monroe has been heading this team for the last 18 years. This is an organization that's not there to generate scandals. They're not there to make ministers uncomfortable. And you notice I said 18 years, so this is cross-administration that Mrs. Ellis has been doing the same work that she has been providing to us now. The Auditor General, I have said before, and I'll say it again, is really supposed to be the government's best friend. Every permanent secretary should say the AG is my bestie. Why? Because the job of the AG is to try to make government look good by sharing with them where things are off and you need to tweak things. Emil is here and can verify that the private sector spends millions of dollars to bring in an auditor to say, show me where the gaps are, the risks are, where the controls are not tight enough, where the efficiencies are not, so I can do better. That's all this report is here to do. I'm sorry about that. So I just wanted to make that very clear. Now, the Auditor General's report, I have to ask the question, has Minister Vaz read it? Because coming out on the heels of the report to say, I have done nothing wrong and the Auditor General is grossly misinformed, is really diminishing the work of the 120 people over there. This is a time when we don't really have to bicker between, is the Auditor General right, is JAMP right, what is Jeanette's motive. Just drop in the name of the guidance note that the Minister himself provided and look for yourself and see what it says, Jamaica, and you can determine. I'll tell you one good quotation.
Hold on, Jeanette. Before you give us that big quotation, we're taking a quick break here inside Lead Story. Coming back, because if speed saves lives, what about the system? Does it save that as well? We'll talk about that next inside Lead Story Prime.
What a Guan is CVMTV's new Vox Pop program, Vibes Yes Vox Pop program. Hey Jamaica, you're watching What a Guan. What a Guan.
Coming to you from Montego Bay. Hello my people.
What a Guan is back. The People's program is back in full force on CVMTV.
What a Guan. Cross.
When the the Sunshine Girls play, the world watches. 3 tests, 1 mission. Take on world number 1, Australia. This is more than a game. It's Jamaica on the world stage. Thursday, February 5, live at 3 a.m. Sunday, February 8 at 12:30 p.m. and Wednesday, February 11 at 3:30 a.m. with delayed broadcast at 8 p.m. Every pass, every goal, every moment, live and exclusive on CVM.
Brought to you by Water and Best Dress Chicken.
We're continuing our discussion about public procurement and emergency procedures after what we saw from Hurricane Melissa and then an audit done by the Auditor General. Jeanette Calder, before the break, you were talking to us about the guidance note and something that you thought was really important that Jamaicans could, going on the Ministry of Finance's webpage, look at for themselves. What do you want them to see?
Right. It says basically here, for example, that in a situation, and I'm quoting, in a situation of emergency or extreme urgency, which is certainly what Melissa was, the head of a procuring entity, in this case the Director General of ODPEM, should organize the procurement processes of the entity so as to enable a swift and decisive response. And it goes on to say the decisions must be approved by the head of the procuring entity, and it must be in place before you have, gone ahead with those procurements. And that's all. Andre has shown you that is just 2 steps. The DG simply have to say, we need these devices, here is the approval. I don't know how long it takes for you to simply fill out the internal form. As Andrea said, you don't have to go to Tom, Dick and Harry, the financial secretary, the permanent secretary, PPC, all of that done. The government has done a good job. So it is puzzling to me to respond directly to what you said, the Prime Minister said. It is puzzling to me, Emile, that I am here as a citizen bragging about the good work of the government, set in train by Dr. Clark, completed by Minister Favour Williams, while Minister Vaz was in the House, a part of the process of seeing how the red tape has disappeared. I am commending the government for that, while the head of government is saying to the public, we have a problem with bureaucracy. I'm applauding Dr. Holness, and Dr. Holness is, according to Jody, is saying to the people of Jamaica that we have a problem in emergencies with bureaucracies, and I'm humbly submitting that no, the government has done a fantastic job in dealing with that. Now, Emile said he's not sure why the devices were not utilized. And again, I'm going to ask, has Minister Vaz taken the time to read the report? Because here I happen to have with me what I think is the problem. When you travel, you have to walk with them things here. What the Auditor General's report has told us, Jody, is that the pins,
the
Jamaica
sockets don't
Jamaica
fit.
built for these, and instead the Starlink devices had these. These are European plugs.
So
now,
the plugs don't fit into our walls for them to
our
even be
electrical
used.
standards. Now, what that simply meant, Jamaica, is in this rush that we could not even wait for ODPEM to do its job, the rush to get help out is that in 53 days, none of these had been utilized, and a good chance, Emile, is that this is the problem. None of the socket them in our government can fit this. So I'll give you one example. The report says that the Jamaica Customs Agency has had to hire professional services to install, because they also came without the mounting peripherals, and they came in this manner that they need to go and buy adapters, which means spending additional cost. So it's now added cost, we're losing value for money, and people have not utilized them, and the good probability is that this is part of it. The kits also did not come with some of the things that they needed. So what we're humbly submitting is that a minister that does not have portfolio responsibility for ODPEM, because people might be thinking it's the minister in charge that even instructed the Director General. No.
First it was on the local government, then it was under the OPM, never under...
And it still is under OPM.
Right, and never under the control of Darrell Vaz as Minister of Telecommunications and Energy.
So you have a minister that does not even have responsibility for ODPEM. So it could have been the Minister of Health, it could have been the Minister of Culture, instructing that this is what you are to do, this is who is to get the contract, and this is where you are to deliver the devices. So the devices never got to the entity that purchased them. So they hadn't even gotten a chance to inspect them, though paying for them. They probably, Emil could have said to the contractor, hold on, boss man, we can't take this. But they never went to the purchaser. So the purchaser didn't even get to do what the law says must be done. When you buy something using public funds, you must document it and you must record what you got and put it in inventory. So that's another breach broken. And let me just quickly say, Jody,
yes,
that's another good thing that the government has done in 2020. I'll come back another time to talk to you about inventory management and the crisis in government.
Well, that is something that had been highlighted for ODPEM in particular, unable to respond to requests to show their inventory, and then the work that has been now given to Commander Gale in order to put in time an inventory system. Yes.
And the Auditor General in that very report pointed out that in July of 2024, a month after burial in June, ODPEM again got several assets and units and all manner of things to respond, and they're not taking the time, Emil, to say we get 1,000 tapalin, yes, and so we can record what we got and where it is gone. Now, when you do not inventory that, they get feet and they walk. That's just the truth. So the Auditor General told ODPEM in July 2024, you have to write down what the government has given to you. We are back here today, and one of the things in the report says $59.6 million spent on tapalins, water, and food items, and ODPEM hasn't written down one thing.
All right, Jeanette Calder, you called Emil Leiber's name 15 times. I want to give him a chance to be able to. Emil is like, listen, you called my name 10 times. Emil Leiber, if you could fix one thing, change one rule tomorrow, especially hearing now what Jeanette Calder has said, what would you fix or change?
All right, so let me say I agree with Jeanette on almost everything, right? So it's not that Jeanette and I are in disagreement. Based on reading the Auditor General's report, what should have been in place is the proper systems to enable the emergency procurement regulations to be properly applied. And I am also in support of accountability after the fact, in the sense that they should have uploaded the contracts, they should have done all the things that the regulations require for audit and review purposes and so on. Where I think the nuance is, and where there's perhaps some minor variance, is, as I said, being on the ground, recognizing that in many instances in government, systems are not as they should be, meaning that they legislate well, they may write it down, they may structure it, but they don't always, when called upon, sometimes it's not always in the state that it needs to be. So if I want, to change one thing, I would wish that the government structure always matched the legislation, always had the right resources, people, and so on. So that inventory management system should have been in place from it was flagged from before.
Let me tell you that I have inventory management at my own home, and I know all the food that I have there and all the things that I have there. So I can't understand what we're talking about when it comes to government things. Andre Bennett, I give you the last word here. As you're talking now about things not working the way they should, that's a legitimate complaint that has been leveled. The Prime Minister, no less, leveling it at the system as well. How do you respond before we close?
Yeah, I think, public procurement is not complicated by rules alone. It's complicated by the ethos in which those rules have to be applied and the environment in which those rules are meant to be applied. And I say that because one of the prevailing issues coming out of the reforms of the 90s, 2000s is that the rules were built around constraint. And so the whole idea of public procurement was meant to be a control of corruption. And so there was layer after layer of oversight as a means of finding corrupt actors. Well, I mentioned before that public procurement has to be concerned as much about process as about outcomes. And I think that's where a lot of the tension now is. It's how do we transition the system from being so hyper-focused on these controls to ensuring that we also consider the commercial issues that attend to these acquisitions. What I'm concerned about, though, is that based on utterances of many people, we're swinging from one end of the pendulum to the next.
Other. Well, that's certainly something that we have to have a public procurement part 2 conversation then, because emergencies test systems. They, coming up in this conversation though, do not nullify them. If we accept that the law can be breached when the stakes are high, we must also accept that it can be breached when the public is not watching. Yeah, exactly. And it's not about second-guessing hurricane response. We see it being important. It's about deciding what kind of state we are under pressure. That is the story. I'm Jody Ann Quarry, and on behalf of the entire CVM production team, thank you for watching Lead Story Prime. Have a fantastic evening, and thanks so much for joining us, Jeanette Calder, Andre Bennett, and Emil Leiber. For all of you at home, I hope you stay safe. Up next, Fan Central.
Sunshine Girls play, the world watches. 3 tests, 1 mission. Take on world number 1, Australia. This is more than a game. It's Jamaica on the world stage. Thursday, February 5, live at 3 a.m. Sunday, February 8 at 12:30 p.m. And Wednesday, February 11 at 3:30 a.m. with delayed broadcast at 8 p.m. Every pass, every goal, every moment. Live and exclusive on CVM.
Brought to you by Water and Best Dressed Chicken.
Welcome to What a Guan. Now, What a Guan is CVM TV's new Vox Pop program, Vibes Yes Vox Pop program. Hey Jamaica, you're watching What a Guan.
What a Guan. Coming to you from Montego Bay. Hello, my people.
What a Guan is back. The People's Program is back in full force on CVM TV.
Cross. Let's delve deep into the issues. We'll take you beneath the surface.
Greetings and salutations. My name is Orville Higgins, and it's another edition of Fan Central.
Talking to the people at the heart of the top sporting stories. Hear from your favorite sportsmen and women and the administrators who work tirelessly to make it all happen. It's live sports talk.
I've written an entire article.
Yeah.
Looking at all the major issues every Tuesday at 9 p.m. It's Fan Central.
The internationally acclaimed On Stage with Winfred Williams.
At a new time, Saturdays at 8 p.m. on CVM TV.
So much more than entertainment.
Every dream conquered is another dream gained. I land and I fly again like a jet plane. Headed straight in your direction. 'Cause I'm wiser, one step closer. I'm winning 'cause I work so hard. And the music you stop playing, and the people them I say we are my show tonight. Oh,
I think that I found myself.